This is a massive update for user privacy. It is a complete game changer. It's been in the making for 6 months now, and finally it's actually happening. 14.5, or the biggest feature in 14.5, is app tracking transparency, which is a complete game changer for the privacy of iPhone users. That was actually supposed to come in September last year, but it was delayed. So we got all the other iOS 14 privacy features. So we've got some cool things. We've got privacy labels later in the year. But the reason it was delayed is because there were big complaints from some of the app developers who said this was going to really, really hurt them. And the reason for this is because it affects something called the Identifier for Advertisers, or the Gdpr, which is basically something that they use to track users, so to see the efficiency of ad campaigns, for example. So if you think of yourself as a user, you might go onto Instagram, you might see an advert for something on Instagram, and you might then actually go onto Google and you might Google the company, look them up and buy something. Now, it's very useful for the advertiser to know how well that campaign has done and how it's done well. And the Gdpr is the means of tracking that. It's going to be a massive, massive deal, because basically what's going to happen is when you're a user of an Apple phone, every time you open an app, for the first time, by the way, this isn't going to continually happen for the rest of your life, you're going to see a pop-up box and it's going to say, allow, for example, Facebook to track you. And you can say allow to track or not to track. So far, the surveys say that most users are going to say, no, I won't allow this tracking to happen. People don't like to be tracked across the internet. Why would they? It's quite an intrusive thing once you know about it. So really the aim of this is privacy, but it is transparency. It's knowing that we're being tracked across services.
It's important to point out here that we're talking about third-party advertising and tracking. It's great that Apple are saying that we should have the right to opt in rather than opt out. I think that's brilliant. I don't think anybody's going to argue about that. But you've got to remember that Apple itself is still not giving users the chance to opt in on its own tracking, advertising platform tracking. So personalized ads. You have to dig into the settings, dig into the privacy settings. Currently on iOS, it's in settings, privacy, Apple advertising, personalized ads. And you have to opt out of that to stop Apple tracking you, to be able to place personalized ads on its own advertising platform across its own services. So while it's a great thing, I think that we could be looking and asking Apple to do a little bit more and adopting this opt-in policy across all advertising tracking.
And Facebook has claimed that it's going to harm small businesses as a consequence. When has Facebook kind of stepped back now? Is everyone kind of accepting this is going to happen?
Facebook hasn't stepped back, but they did say recently that they weren't going to collect the identifier for advertisers, and they also said that they were going to do a test where they were actually going to ask users if they could track them and see, how this would happen within their own app. Not really sure where that's gone, but the other surveys that have come out so far have shown that only 30% at the most of users at the moment are saying yes. Obviously, these are smaller kind of groups of people, and when this actually rolls out, maybe more people will say yes to tracking, but they might. I say normal people who aren't really caring about being tracked. I mean, we've talked about this before, haven't we? People see an advert, something they like, and they say, yeah, that's nice, I did actually want to buy that anyway. I don't agree with that. I wouldn't like that happening to me, but some people do like this personalized advertising. If they understand that that is what they're going to get from this tracking, then maybe they will say yes. Who knows?
I've talked about it before. You can clearly see from the privacy labels that all this data is being harvested. Fine, okay, but come out and explain, what are you taking and what are you doing with it? We see all this nonsense on the internet in terms of are our phones listening to us because, I talked to somebody about a pair of shoes and lo and behold, I was on Facebook and I saw an ad for a pair of shoes. We all kind of know there's a lot of nonsense being spoken about this stuff, but when you actually realize what you can do with all this data, when you understand who's talking to who and what they might be talking about, some content can be monitored. We know what your browsing behaviors are. If I know everything you do on the 16 hours a day, you might be online in some way, shape, or form. It's amazing what I can work out about you. I can tell, I know more about you than the closest members of your family, than your partner. And that's what people need to understand. They're not spying on you. They don't need to spy on you. They know everything about you. They know you better than you know yourself. they know what you're going to click tomorrow better than you do. That is, the situation we find ourselves in.
Indeed. But here's the thing then, going on from what you're saying there, this is all very true. I'm a great fan of what Apple's doing here, but is it too little too late? Is this actually going to change anything for everybody to already use? Our data is already out there. It's already collected. Our profiles are there. This isn't going to erase our profiles. Is this too late?
That is a question that I suspect we're going to keep coming back to. Has the ship sailed? Is it, can you put the genie back in the bottle, use whatever euphemism you want? How on earth do we exist as people in a world where so much of our data or information we've shared or has been kind of captured by others on our behalf?
On the very basic level, this is about knowing about it though. And as you said, Zach, it's in a simple way. Apple is really good at doing things in a simple way. That's what it's famous for. If Apple makes something, it makes it work. And hopefully, not to be an Apple fangirl or anything like that, but I said I would never have a smartwatch, and then Apple bought out the Apple Watch, and I bought an Apple Watch. It does things, and it only does them when it can do it well. And I am hoping that this particular aspect of iOS 14.5 is going to do and be pretty massive because of that. It's going to make people aware in a very simple way.
And it could act as a catalyst for other vendors, other big hyperscale platforms to actually start looking at it and doing the same.
I know there's been a lot of discussion around social media regulation in the last few years, and data regulation in the wake of Cambridge Analytica. But if we're honest, we haven't really seen very much. We've seen Apple taking the lead on certain things to try and come down on it. We've also seen trackers start to disappear from browsers, for example, across the whole industry. But that was almost an inevitable consequence of the backlash that had occurred at the time. But we still know that the data industry is bigger than ever. The mobile advertising industry is bigger than ever. The share values, the enterprise values of the businesses doing all this are bigger than ever. So somehow the balance is no more reined in than it's ever been. As a user, the reality is you've got little kids, everything they do ever is going to be in somebody's database. And, the number of data breaches and leaks we see, month after month tells us that if the data is captured, it is very possible that data is going to find its way out onto the wider internet. So privacy becomes a completely watered down concept in that kind of world. And we haven't done anything to change that yet.
Facebook's been arguing for quite a while, quite strongly. And in the end, this hurts Facebook's revenues. It says it affects small businesses, but yeah, the biggest effect is on Facebook's entire business model. So you can see why Facebook has been taking out full-page ads in big newspapers and saying this is a bad thing. But they've kind of backed down now. They've accepted that this isn't going to change. This is what's happening.
My concern, and it's clearly a step in the right direction, my concern on this is that it gives people a false sense of security, particularly where Facebook and to a lesser extent Google are concerned. Because I see the pop-up, the dialog box, and I say, no, I don't want to be tracked by Facebook. And I assume that I'm much safer than I was before. But the reality is that all the data that Facebook is capturing on me, on my iPhone, off Facebook, on other sites, that hasn't changed. Am I right in thinking what actually happens is when Facebook goes to sell ads to one of its customers, it can show that the ad was successful, i.e. I showed Kate an ad and she clicked through and went and bought a pair of shoes, right? And that is the tracking from the ad through to somewhere else, and it can't do that anymore. What it can do is can pick up all the information when you're on Facebook and all the stuff that it gathers. You can see the privacy label for Facebook, that's not changing. So users still need to be aware that just clicking no is not enough. There's lots more you need to do to stop these companies from pulling your data.
Yeah, these companies will still take your data. This does stop the kind of tracking for advertising across your iPhone. It is very important actually to know that. This is about tracking specifically, and this is actually saying that this type of tracking is quite intrusive, and this is how we stop it, and this is how we make people aware that tracking is happening on iPhones. I mean, at the moment, you can actually find out if you're being tracked on your iPhone through certain apps. For example, there is an app called Lockdown, which actually brings up the trackers. So you can see all the marketing trackers that are following you on your iPhone, and you can block them. It's got a paid for option on there, which really you have to use to get the full functionality from the app. So it's not free, but it is actually kind of along the same ethos. These are trackers, these are marketing trackers. We know about them, but maybe other people don't. And it's making people aware and stopping them from doing it if they don't want this to happen. The other thing actually it's important to note is that there is a setting in your privacy settings that's going to be there in iOS 14.5, which is going to allow you to turn off tracking altogether. And that is the same place you're going to be able to control each individual app. So if you might have previously allowed an app to track, because my fear is for people who might see this is they might just want it to go away in the same way that people want the cookies pop-ups to go away. So they just press. They don't care. They just allow. And people have got into that mindset of doing that. So if you have allowed something in your privacy settings, you'll be able to go in and just turn that either off blanket altogether or just turn that app off that you've accidentally turned on.
Perfect. Interesting on that. What Apple's done on this, the cookie thing is a great example, because the industry found a way to turn protective policy or capability and has made it pretty limp, right? Because it basically says, accept these cookies or fill in this 22-page form of all your preferences and no one can be bothered, so everyone just clicks fine. What Apple has done is taking control of this. They're not allowing, which was one of the big arguments, wasn't it? They're not allowing the developers to explain what they want to do. They're making it very simple. Yes or no. Do you want to be tracked across the internet by these super sleuths, or would you rather be private? Clearly, I think way more than 70% are going to offer privacy. But that's really good. And that had the cookies been done in the same way, a lot of us would have said no, but you don't have a choice. They don't make it easy for you to say no to cookies.
Apple is actually saying that it's replacing the iDFA with its own privacy preserving technology. We haven't really seen the results of this, but it's not saying we don't want advertising and that this isn't going to happen, because it also is worth mentioning that some people are saying that Apple is using this to its own advantage, that Apple actually, because its business model is based around not advertising, it's based around hardware, it's based around services and the whole ecosystem that Apple kind of owns and making money through that, including the App Store, that it would benefit Apple if it were to be able to encourage, for example, app makers to charge for in-app purchases and for Apple to make money from adverts that way, because Apple obviously gets a cut.
It's interesting, isn't it? There's a general lack of understanding around how the mobile and online advertising industry works. I think there's an assumption that you log onto a site and you see an ad and somehow it's part of a complete package that's been put together. And obviously that's not how it works. So your phone knows lots about you, and all of these trackers and data collection combines to provide a picture of you. And as you use apps and you browse online, that package of your information is provided to like an air traffic control system that basically provides advertisers with the ability to bid to put an ad on your phone. It all happens in absolute real time. So because you represented a certain kind of person, somebody can then put an advert into your stream, if you like. And the challenge is that has spawned an unimaginably large industry over the last few years, which has been incredibly effective when compared to traditional forms of advertising. But because it's almost grown up by stealth, literally, it doesn't have the same regulation. You wouldn't be able to run ads on TV that had the same level of intrusive access to information and operated in the same stealthy way as you can do on a mobile device or online. And the spin side of that, and it's less of a problem with Apple, it's a big problem on Android, conversely, has been all of the ad fraud that it spawns, because it's created, there's so much money being generated, there's a lot of fraudulent ads as well, but it's all part of that same legitimate process. because it's so stealthy, it's in the background, it's quite hard to be controlled, it's quite hard to regulate. This is just, these are steps in the right direction, but to your point, it is in the interest of the broader industry to find new ways of doing things. We've seen similar stuff with Google and Chrome and other stuff where they're trying to get rid of the stuff that has got the bad rep and put in new ways of doing it. And Apple is clearly doing the same thing. Ultimately, ads aren't going away. Targeted ads of some description aren't going away, but we're maybe starting to see some controls.
And transparency, because that's the really important thing, isn't it? Just making people aware of it, and maybe it will give them a bit of a shock and they will be like, I really don't like this, and it will turn the advertising industry on its head. But that kind of needs to happen. That's why iOS 14.5 is this revolutionary thing, and it's why it's a game changer. It's going to change the whole internet and the way things are done on mobiles. So
you've got, I guess, and then from a user perspective, you've seen the battle in the media. Facebook, there's been almost like a war of words between Tim Cook and Mark Zuckerberg around Apple being Facebook's big competitor in some of its platforms in the US, iMessage versus WhatsApp, for example. That privacy labels were not a fair fight between how Apple was presenting itself and the third-party developers, and that's been sorted. It's clearly a separate topic. But what we've seen is the data aggregators, the data collectors, and the technology players, albeit some like Google sit both sides of the fence, have kind of found themselves opposite sides of this debate. From a user perspective, it's confusing. And I think that is, and I don't think most of the media around 14.5 and other things have helped. I don't think it explains to me as a user what I should be doing, what's changing, why it's changing, how I should use it. I think the app transparency, the tracking transparency one, is perhaps the simplest thing that we've seen, because it is in your face, right? It's proactive, it will present, and you will have to click yes or no. Most people are clearly going to click no. That might be a good or a bad thing. Maybe it should be a little bit more complex, but when we've seen other forms of new technologies to protect users, they haven't been that simple, and that has just led to more complexity and obfuscation. So maybe, hopefully, we're seeing, some genuine transparency and the pressure on these organizations to explain to you as a user what data they're collecting and how they're using it. My biggest frustration in this whole debate, and the thing I've commented lots on, is what makes me angry is the refusal for these large big tech, these hyperscale platforms to just come out and be honest.
Perhaps this is a good point to jump into security updates as well. Again, it's not by no means guaranteed that this is coming in iOS 14.5. We're going to have to wait and see next week, hopefully, well, almost certainly, when the update comes. But it's something that's close to my heart because, as people may know, and as you mentioned in the last video, I recently jumped ship from being an Android user for the last 10 years. Before that, I was iOS. Android user to iOS now. I've got an iPhone as my primary smartphone. And the reason for that was the fractured Android ecosystem. More specifically, because security updates often took ages to arrive on my phone, even when there were exploits in the wild, known in the wild, even when Android had issued an update package. So, for example, they've been getting a lot of press recently for issuing update packages, security update packages, before the start of the month. So ordinarily they'd be available for the first of the month, and they were getting them out in the last week of the month before. That's great, but those ones, sometimes I was getting those at the start of the month after. Now that's a huge window of opportunity, an exploit window left open for attackers who can get my phone. So that's one of the reasons why one of the main reasons why I've switched. Now, kudos to Apple if they're finally getting on top of this, because they don't issue the security updates separately from the iOS point updates, not as a rule. They have recently, so a couple of the last minor updates, the sub-dates, if you want to call them that, have actually only targeted vulnerabilities. That's all they've done. And that's, again, something you were talking about last time. However, it looks like they're going to be unbundling security updates from the main system updates. So you'll be able to choose to update just the security stuff when that comes out, without making the jump to that major update of iOS, which a lot of people don't want to do, which I always find mad anyway. They don't want to do because somebody's written a silly story that says, warning, don't update to iOS because it's going to destroy your phone. Well, no, it won't destroy your phone. Yes, some of these updates do have problems, but that's not the point. However, if you can unbundle the two so it takes away that fear from people, and they say, well, okay, I'll update the security update because that's protecting me, that's a great thing. Hopefully, that's going to come in with 14.5. It's not a big leap. As I say, they've been doing it for the last couple of sub-dates anyway. Mac users can already have separate security updates, as I understand it. I don't use a Mac myself, but they come in separately. So it's not a huge leap for Apple. And anything that ultimately means quicker vulnerability patching for everybody has to be a good thing, right?
So the other big change in iOS 14.5 is being able to unlock your phone using your Apple Watch. This has been quite well covered, hasn't it? David, do you want to tell us a story about your bus journey?
Well, yeah, okay. Look, I'm laughing in the background here when you said that, because as a big update to iOS 14.5, again, look, I'm kicking back to being a long-time Android user and specifically a long-time Samsung Galaxy user, and being able to use my smartwatch to unlock my phone is nothing new for me. It's been around for yonks. It's called Smart Lock on Samsung, and I could unlock my phone if I was wearing a mask. Well, it wouldn't make any difference anyway because of a fingerprint sensor. This is another thing. But I could unlock my phone if my paired watch was on my wrist. I could unlock my phone if I was in a certain location. I never used it because I didn't need to. I had a fingerprint reader. Jumping over to iOS, I've got an iPhone 12, iOS 12, Face ID only, no Touch ID. So with a mask on, yeah, it's problematic. But again, I'm not sure it's such a big deal because, yeah, I've got an Apple Watch as well. I've made the full jump on the mobile side of things. I'm doing a lot of bus journeys at the minute. I can't drive. I had neck surgery, spinal surgery. I'm not in a position to be driving at the moment. So I'm in a position where I'm making a lot of hospital journeys. I'm traveling from Halifax to Leeds. I'm getting on buses all the time. I don't have to dig into my pocket for my iPhone. I don't have to open up the iPhone. I don't have to use cash. I don't have to use my cards out of my pocket. I just use the Apple Watch now. It's literally Apple Pay on Apple Watch. Boom, it's straight there. It's brilliant. I love it. And it's great that Apple is catching up with Samsung on this one. And they're chasing Samsung's tail on this one. There's no doubt about that. But it's something that wasn't necessary. They didn't need to be in this position. And hopefully they won't need to be in this position anyway, once we're no longer wearing masks on the whole, that's going to come at some point. Because all they needed to do, and what they need to do with the iPhone 13, Touch ID, it's there. They got it on the iPads on the power button. Why could they not have just put that on the power button on the iPhone 12? Problem solved. I know, hindsight, etc., but it was just a simple thing. It's an extra bit of security, an extra option, and I'm hoping that that's going to be coming in moving forward.
A week's time, all iPhone users out there will be able to get hold of the new operating system, the update to the operating system. The advice is clearly to update as soon as that's available. It brings some great security and privacy benefits. What beyond that? What do you want to see for iOS 15? If you had a kind of a request, if they're watching, Kate.
Oh, well, I'd like to see more anti-tracking technology. I'd like to see everybody being completely open about the data that's collected and how you're tracked online, including Apple itself. And people should be given, in my opinion, the option to opt in, never to opt out of things. I have noticed, I don't want to go down this avenue of kind of going off on the side, but I have noticed in the UK here in Britain, we have the Gdpr, which is a European regulation. And one of the stipulations of that regulation is that you're supposed to opt in to marketing. And I have noticed on websites when I'm in Europe, so I'm part of that, well, not in the EU, but I'm in Europe. And as part of that regulation, I have to opt out of marketing. So when I'm buying something from a shop, so often now I'm having to opt out. So that's just fallen by the wayside. So I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but what I want to see is I want to see everything sticking to opt-in, every single thing, opt-in to Siri recording me, even if that is for analytics, not for advertising. I want to opt in to any of my data being collected, not having to opt out.
Well, mine comes in two parts. First part, 3 words, what Kate said. Second part is I want that transparency from Apple to be across the board. So I want that with securities stuff, so with vulnerabilities. I want them to be a little bit more transparent about the vulnerabilities that are hitting iOS. I want them to be more transparent with their own on-platform advertising, opt-ins and opt-outs. I want more transparency.
For me, I think there are still some, I agree on the opt-in. I think the default toggle should be off for all of these privacy invasive capabilities on your phone. But I think there are still too many hidden privacy incursions, even on an iPhone. 2 that I've looked at, mail tracking. The fact that, images on unsolicited mail coming through with trackers on them, and you can disable the images, which solves a lot of the problem. That should be a default setting. And also things like the ability to very easily stop embedding data in the photos that you share online on social media. Yes, the platforms you share them with will strip the metadata out before they share it back, but some, Facebook, for example, will collect that data. I think it should be, Apple should think about what's in the gaps, what are the exceptions, how can some of those exceptions be exploited, and should shut down those vulnerabilities. I would really welcome that.
One other thing that I would mention is that in all of this discussion, what Apple's doing is great. There's no doubt about that. It's great. But we shouldn't take this out of proportion. We've got to remember that Apple's share of the mobile market is minute compared to Android. Android dominates the smartphone market. It really does. I mean, it stupidly dominates. So let's not forget that there's a huge privacy and a huge security problem out there for most people that this isn't going to solve.